Welcome to the 3DownNation podcast. My name is John Hodge, joined by JC Abbott. Justin Dunk should return for next week's episode where we'll do a full preview of the CFL Combine in Regina. But today, we've got a bunch of stuff on the docket. We've finally started getting some pro days, JC. We're starting to sniff that CFL Combine coming along. How excited are you?
Draft season is my favorite part of the CFL calendar. Anybody who listens to this podcast knows that. So I am fired up. I am juiced up for the combine coming around the corner. I am constantly checking all these pro day results and reaching out to players who didn't get combine invites that I think, hey, maybe there's a chance they get picked in the 8th round of the CFL draft. I'm all on top of it right now, Hodge, and I cannot wait for April.
I love the CFL draft. I always have. And I will admit that I am more interested and focused on the top half than the bottom half. I will give full credit to you as a bona fide, hardcore draft junkie that you are just as excited, not only about the 8th round picks, but like the next 30 or 40 guys off the board as you are as who goes number one or who even goes, we'll say, above number one. Because, of course, there are some guys almost every year who don't get picked in the CFL draft because they will be very obviously lifelong NFLers or career-long NFLers, I should say. So credit to you. I'm excited as well. We're going to get it all cut up, and we're going to talk a bunch about the first mock draft that I put out on this show. But first, let's give the people a little preview. Today, we're discussing the Winnipeg Blue Bombers rounding out their coaching staff.
3DownNation's first CFL mock draft.
You see, I teased that one already. Riders receiver Shawn Bane Jr. giving an update on his knee injury.
2 CFL teams getting extra second-round picks.
Brandon Alexander not being ready to retire.
A top prospect opting out of the CFL Combine.
Some Canadians getting paid big dollars in the NFL.
And Alex Singleton making a cameo on Netflix. But first, Hodge, you reported that the Calgary Stampeders are likely to pick up an extra first-round draft pick if the BC Lions are found to have exceeded the CFL's salary cap by over $100,000 last year. Meanwhile, the Lions and Winnipeg Blue Bombers will both be picking up additional second-round picks thanks to their Canadian content last year. Can you explain how all of this works?
So the second round thing, I'll start with the second part of the question first. This is not new. A few years ago, the CFL brought in 2 bonus picks at the end of the second round. And initially, they went to the 2 worst teams from the previous year, and they were to be utilized on players who fell within the respective territory of those teams. So, for instance, if it was the Saskatchewan Roughriders, they could pick a bonus pick essentially at the end of round 2. They just had to use it on someone who is from Saskatchewan. If BC had the pick, they could do the same thing in the province of BC. Got a little more complicated in places like Alberta or Ontario, where you had multiple teams in the same province. It also got complicated if a player was, let's say, from Halifax. And it's like, okay, well, there is no CFL team in Halifax, unfortunately. Where does this guy's territory reside, right? Which team should get a pick? And I think because it was convoluted, the league got rid of it. And instead, the 2 bonus picks now go to the teams who played the most Canadians the year before. Those were Winnipeg and BC. By the way, I still occasionally, it seems to be less now, but occasionally hear from people, oh, well, my team would be good if only we didn't have so many Canadians and we could just have Americans. Well, guess what? Since they made this change and they've gone over to the teams with the most Canadian players getting the picks, it's always been playoff teams. It's never the bad teams who play the most Canadians. The teams who play the most Canadians are always playoff teams. Winnipeg has gotten the bonus every year. They started 8 or 9 Canadians most of last season, and they went to the Grey Cup for a 5th straight time. So I don't want to hear anybody disparaging the Canadian talent in the CFL. The first part of the question, however, JC, is a lot more interesting because I was not aware of this rule, and I want to give a shout out to my sources who saw my first mock draft and went, you got to do some homework on who's actually going to be picking 8th. And by the way, I don't mean my first mock draft I published. I mean the very first one that I put together a couple weeks ago. They were like, I think Calgary's going to be picking 8th. And so the people who pointed it out to me, I really appreciate you. You know who you are. Did some digging. And lo and behold, there is a rule in the CFL that if you exceed the salary cap by over $100,000, you lose your first round pick. We all knew that. What I didn't know, and judging by the response on social media, most fans did not know, and I suspect some people in the league didn't even know, is that pick doesn't merely get eliminated or canceled. Instead, it is given to the team who had the worst record the season previous, and it is moved to the bottom of the respective round. So if BC does in fact lose their first round pick, which I believe they will, it will not simply disappear. Instead, it will be given to the Calgary Stampeders, and it will be moved to the end of the first round. And because Edmonton used their first round pick on a supplemental selection partway through the 2024 season, there are only 8 picks in the first round. Thus, Calgary picks up a free pick at 8th overall. Good day to be a Stampeders fan.
It's an amazing day to be a Stampeders fan if you want to rebuild your Canadian content. And this, to me, from the Stampeders' perspective, becomes even more of a highway robbery when you consider the fact that they also traded with the BC Lions to acquire Vernon Adams Jr., who is their new franchise quarterback. So they're going to get another first-round pick from the Lions, essentially, and a franchise QB. That's a pretty good haul if you're the Stampeders, in essence, off of some of the mismanagement from the Lions over the last little bit, particularly when it comes to that quarterback position and the money they brought in there last year that helped push them over the cap. It's a wild rule, just from all perspectives. I don't truly understand the logic behind this. I know it's happened once before. Was it in 2008, Hodge? I don't have the number in front of me.
Yes, so in 2007, that was the first year that the league had a salary cap. And that year, the Montreal Alouettes went over by $108,000. So not far over the $100,000 threshold, but they did. Thus, their first-round selection, which would have been 4th overall, went to the bottom of the first round to the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Remember, only 8 teams in the league at that point. So 8th overall, the Tiger Cats used it to select Sam Giguère out of the Université de Sherbrooke. Pardon my terrible accent. But yes, so it has happened, but it happened a long time ago.
I suppose some of the logic behind it, if you're speaking from a league perspective, is it maybe disincentivizes teams from going over that salary cap, because even if you're willing to part ways with a draft pick and you don't prioritize that, now you're actually helping one of your opponents, which is never a good situation to be in. But it's certainly strange to see it play out like this, and hopefully we don't see it happen again.
This was all confirmed by the league. Also confirmed by the league is the way in which penalties are distributed, because the BC Lions, and we don't have a timeline for when the league will hand down punishment. According to the league's constitution, the commissioner has to provide audited salary cap expenditure reports to all 9 teams by the end of March, and then they have to be announced by the end of April. The issue is the draft is on April 29th. So presumably, they're going to announce this. I would assume they'd want to announce it, as far ahead of the draft as possible. It would be kind of a nasty surprise to fans if it was like, hey, the draft starts in 3 hours, but here's the new draft order, and your team just lost the pick. That doesn't make any sense. So, assumedly, this will be announced as soon as possible, but I don't think they've finalized anything yet internally. The auditing, I think, is still ongoing. Last year, it should be noted that salary cap violations were announced the 3rd week of April. Now, nobody lost a pick, so this year I think will be different, but nothing is 100% confirmed on that side of things. What is confirmed, however, is that if a team has a salary cap penalty, the money is not necessarily paid to the league. It's not like Amar Doman's going to have to cut a big fat check to the CFL head office for his team violating the salary cap last year. Instead, the league simply will take that amount off of the monthly distribution payments that it makes 12 times a year until the amount of the fine has been withheld from a team. The other thing that's interesting is the league office does not keep this money. The league office simply takes that amount that it's saved from distributing it to the violating team and distributes it evenly to all the other teams. So if BC, and by the way, again, there's no official total. I've heard rumors that it could be as much as $1 million that BC is going to be fined. That is a rumor. That is not fact, to be very clear. We have to wait and see what the number is. But hypothetically, if BC were to be $1 million over and every other team did not go over the salary cap, that'd be an extra $125,000 per team, which for a CFL size business is not an insignificant amount of money. So imagine you're the Calgary Stampeders, because it's also possible, by the way, if the BC Lions are fined that much, they'll lose their second round pick too. That's a possibility. So imagine you're the Calgary Stampeders and you get Vernon Adams Jr., a bonus first, a bonus second, and 125,000 Gs. That's a good day. That's what we call a good day. That's a good day. So if you're a Stampeders fan, stay tuned to 3DownNation. We might have some good news for you over the next month or so.
And from the Lions' perspective, I think that moment where, or that border where you go from losing just your first to losing your first and your second is crucial, because they've protected themselves in some ways from the loss of their first round pick, because they did pick up the Calgary Stampeders' second round pick in that Vernon Adams Jr. trade. That's 9th overall, which in any other draft would be a first rounder. And as we mentioned off the top, they've got an extra second rounder now as well, because they played their Canadians so much. That means you still have 3 picks in the top 20. That's not bad in a draft that I think both you and I would argue, Hodge, is not necessarily loaded with guys that are surefire slam dunk first rounders, but has a lot of depth in that 10 to 35 range with really talented players. You can sort of load up in that second round area. Now, if you lose one of those picks, I think it's a lot harder to justify this in any perspective, particularly when you are helping one of your closest rivals in the West Division, a team that's already going to be much improved this year because you handed them a franchise quarterback.
Yeah, BC, as per my mock draft, and my mock draft was made with the projection that BC will lose its first round pick, but keep its second round pick. That, again, is not official. That's just what I've projected. BC will pick 9, 12, and 19, which is, in this draft, good, right? And I think that this is a huge coup for Calgary, because they were set to pick 1 and then not again till 20. And this is a draft, I think you're absolutely right, JC. There's no clear number 1 pick, but there are lots of really good players available in the top 20 to 25 picks. And if you're Calgary, a team that needs help everywhere, I was originally looking at this list going, Calgary should trade down. Like, honestly, they should get rid of the first pick and see if they can pick up a late first and a second, because they might, for the price of one good, obviously very good player, they might get 2 really good players, depending on what team falls in love with a particular prospect who meets all of their needs and, blah, blah, blah. I don't think they have to do that anymore. Now you can take the best player who you're going to get in camp, right? A lot of these teams try to sign guys before they even draft them. And then you get a pick at 8, and then you get a pick at 20. That leaves you in a pretty good spot, especially when you gave up originally the 9th overall pick to bring in Vernon Adams Jr. So I like this for Calgary. It is tough for BC, but I do believe, yes, you laid it out well, JC. The Lions aren't screwed here because of the Vernon Adams Jr. trade. They still have good picks, and because they picked up that bonus selection, they've still got 3 in the top 19, which is not a bad place to be. Even if they lose the 12th overall pick, that would still be 2 picks in the top 19. That's not a terrible situation to be in, especially because I think they knew what they were doing, right? This wasn't like they accidentally spent all this money. No, they knew full well what was happening. They knew full well that they were pushing as hard as they could, bringing in Matthew Betts, bringing in Nathan Rourke from the NFL, scratching and clawing to get to the Grey Cup at home. They obviously didn't succeed in that, but it's something they did willfully and that they knew was going to happen. So at the end of the day, I don't think this rule makes sense, especially I think the original idea was, well, if multiple teams are forfeiting picks, we don't want fewer picks in the draft, right? We want as many draft picks as possible. And from, the players' union standpoint, I think you want as many draft picks as possible. From the player side, they want as many draft picks as possible. But the thing we have to remember is when this rule was put into place, there weren't 2 bonus picks at the end of the second round. So they've added 2 picks, and even since this rule came into effect, like the draft used to be 6 rounds, now it's 8. So they have created lots of picks. So for me moving forward, I think it would probably be best to eliminate this rule and just eliminate the pick, right? If you forfeit the pick, it's gone because they've added picks. If they ever were to get rid of the bonus picks, then maybe this rule makes sense, but I don't know. Maybe the better solution, by the way, is instead of stealing a draft pick from a team, maybe it's, hey, we're going to turn your first into an 8th. Like you're going to keep the same number of picks, but everyone else is getting to the front of the line before you are, if that makes sense. Because that way you still get your picks, you just get them much later on. Your first becomes an 8th. But anyway, it's a quirky rule. I appreciate that it was brought to my attention. I'm thankful that I was able to do the journalism necessary to report this, and I appreciate the league confirming it on my behalf, because it is, I think, a very interesting story that certainly will impact the 2025 CFL draft. As our own Justin Dunk reported, 4 members of the Saskatchewan Roughriders have restructured their contracts for 2025. Is that a big deal, little deal, or no deal?
I think it's a big deal. Now, is this going to be earth-shattering savings necessarily from the Saskatchewan Roughriders perspective? No, but it's still a significant chunk of change, and I think these are some savvy moves from the organization with some players that were in a position where they needed to maybe earn a little bit less going forward because of what they did last year. So to keep them around, you strike a new deal that's a little bit more affordable for your side. Give them a signing bonus so that they have a little bit of breathing room when it comes to take-home money with taxation. As we know, that's different. And you save against the cap. The 4 players in question, to run down the list, it's AJ Ouellette, the running back, who's going from about 170K hard to 152. Jamarcus Hardrick, the right tackle, who was hurt for most of last year, from $231,000 to $214,000. Shawn Bane Jr., who also had a season-ending knee injury last year, from $175,000 to $133,000. And then strong side linebacker CJ Rivas also redid his deal, although we don't know what he was earning last year. He is now making $109,000. So I think all things considered, this is a good move to develop that flexibility in your roster. This puts these players a little bit more on par with what I think they are worth right now, coming off injuries last season, and allows the Riders to maybe add another piece to their team to have that insurance if these guys can't necessarily return to the form that they played at in 2023.
This is no deal for me, and I'll tell you why. The reason why these restructures happen, and this isn't just the Riders who do this, there's lots of teams who do this. They'll restructure contracts, flipping either a salary or money that was previously negotiated into a signing bonus. And obviously, the only way to get a signing bonus is to sign a new contract. Signing bonuses are taxed at a lower rate in the United States, like for American players. All 4 of these players are American. There's a reason for that. And so AJ Ouellette's take-home pay, going from 170 to 152, is going to be about the same because he's paying far less tax on that $40,000 signing bonus than he would if it was all salary. So you could say, well, it's a win for the team because at least their cap numbers are coming down. And that is true. But here's the issue you run into. If a guy is set to make $230 for the season, but it's all evenly spaced over the course of the regular season, and in week 2 he tears his Achilles, great news. Almost all of that money is now available to spend elsewhere. You're saving against the cap. If that guy gets a $110,000 bonus in March, well, all of a sudden he's only making $120 the rest of the way. If he tears his Achilles week 2, half of that money is already gone, right? And that's something that irks me a little bit when guys get hurt early in the year. Fans go, wow, well, this team's going to have all this extra. This is okay because now they've got all this extra money to spend. This guy, no, it totally depends on how the contract is structured. If a guy is making $200 but they got $110,000 up front. The team has jack to spend the rest of the year. There's no extra savings when that guy gets hurt. If it's $200 hard and it's all salary, yeah, there's lots of money to save. But no good agent is doing that because your player needs to be protected, right? And generally speaking, anybody worth a lot of money will get off-season money because you're not signing somewhere for all salary, because if you get cut in training camp, your client gets nothing. So, like, good for the Riders, saving a little bit on the cap. This does leave some issue, right, if these guys get hurt. And by the way, 3 of these guys got hurt for like meaningful lengths of time in 2024. I think these are all good players. I think that it's good to save some money on the cap, but to me, it's not a big deal. It's not even a little deal. To me, it's no deal. It's kind of neutral. It's neutral.
I see your point there, Hodge, but I think it's also worth noting that I think in the case of almost all of these players, and I don't have their former deals in front of me, but I know several of them at least had off-season money already in their previous contracts. So the idea that these signing bonus would put the Riders on the hook for more money pre-injury, I think that's probably to a certain extent. These signing bonuses may be slightly larger than what the existing off-season bonuses would have been, but these guys were already due money before they would have ever played a snap, and that's part of the reason these deals get renegotiated when they do, is because you want to get them in place before that off-season money hits. So I see your point, but I think a lot of that damage, if you will, in terms of off-season money will have already been accounted for.
And that's fair. And the reason those roster bonuses are in place, right, is to protect the player. If a guy is hurt, which we'll get into maybe on next week's show, if a team releases them ahead of a bonus, potentially the union can grieve that and try to get the bonus paid. Or if a guy is healthy and the roster bonus is set to kick in and a team says, you know what, this guy's on the books for $200 this year, he's got a $40,000 roster bonus upcoming, we don't think he's worth that, we're just going to cut him loose. Well, then he can presumably hit the free agent market before anybody else. So teams have lots of money to spend. It puts that player into an advantageous position negotiating-wise with other teams, right? That happens every year where guys get cut ahead of an offseason roster bonus. Saskatchewan obviously likes its core. It wants to keep AJ Ouellette. It wants to keep Jamarcus Hardrick, even though both guys kind of busted last year as free agent additions. It's not necessarily their fault, right? Injuries happen. Shawn Bane was a great free agent pickup for this team a couple years ago. And then CJ Rivas has been an excellent find for this team, right? He was not a free agent addition. He was just a guy they developed themselves. So I like all these players. I like these contracts. But I think sometimes, and 3DownNation's been guilty of this, where we say, oh, so-and-so renegotiates contract. And it's like, wow, what an amazing person. And this, they're so thoughtful and they're so selfless and they're helping the team out. And it's like, they're not helping anybody out. They're just getting more money up front. Their cap it's coming down a little bit. Yeah, it's coming down a little bit. But all in all, they're gonna take home. They're gonna make the same amount of money after taxes. They're netting the same money. This is a paperwork transaction, and I also would not be surprised if there were teams who, when signing players, said, "Hey, it's a 2-year, but don't worry, in year 2 we'll renegotiate and we'll change, X dollars into a signing bonus, and we'll just do a handshake for that." I think that's pretty commonplace. So a lot of these, it's not even the team going cap in hand saying, "Hey, can we please have some savings?" They're going, "Hey, as we previously discussed, we're prepared to do this," and the team or the agent or the player goes, "Great." So to me, it's no deal, but hey, if it works, it works.
All right, Hodge, it's time for the headline story because you've released your first 2025 CFL Mock Draft covering the first 2 rounds of action. How did it come together? And take us through some of the key selections.
Well, here's how you make a mock draft. The first thing is you sketch it out, and then you tweak it, and then you tweak it, and then you tweak it, and then you send it to 10 or 15 different people who are smart, preferably smarter than you, and then you tweak it, and then you tweak it, and you do that 100 more times, and then you finish it, and then you publish it as fast as you can, because if you don't publish it right then, you're inevitably going to delete the whole thing and start from scratch. which is a giant waste of time. So all in all, I wouldn't say I'm thrilled with how it turned out. I'm satisfied, which is probably as good as you can say about any mock draft. For the record, last year, I got 5 of the eventual first rounders in the first round of my mock draft. And last year, my first mock draft was pre-combine. So I got 5 of the 9 picks in the first round. Not necessarily perfectly correct in terms of the actual pick, but of the 9 players taken in the first round, I correctly projected 5 of those players. So I'm hopeful that I'll get at least 5 out of 9 this year, but we'll see. There's also feedback that I've received since this that maybe there's a guy here or there who should be a little higher, a little lower, but all in all, I'd say I'm pleased with it. Let's start with the first round pick. And by the way, as we are recording this on Wednesday, March 12th, Connor Shea, linebacker out of Wyoming, is having his pro day. So we do not have that information right now, but it will be up on 3DownNation if you want to see how Connor Shea tested. Connor Shea, 6'2", 232 pounds, was born in Danville, California, but qualified for Canadian citizenship through his father, Chuck, who was born in Charlottetown, PEI. And given Connor Shea's stature, given his position, given the fact that he was born in California, there's a lot of comparisons to be drawn. Heck, he played at Wyoming, which is not even that far from Montana State. There's a lot of comparisons to make to Alex Singleton here. Now, I'm not saying that Connor Shea is Alex Singleton. He was a 1-year starter with the Cowboys. Alex Singleton was a 2-year starter at Montana State. But Shea was excellent this past season. 76 total tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, 4 pass knockdowns, and a pick. Linebacker is not a very deep position in this year's draft. Connor Shea is probably the only guy you'd look at as like, okay, this guy is like, there's a very good chance he's going to be a starter in the CFL, either at will or at Mike, weak side linebacker or middle linebacker. So for that reason, and also given the fact that the Stampeders look like they'll be starting a linebacker this year, I projected Connor Shea at number 1. Do I think that's a slam dunk? No. I think there are other guys who could be in the mix, and we can talk about that a little bit. But that is who I had at number 1 in my mock.
Yeah, I actually really like that selection. I've leaned to Connor Shea throughout the early part of this process as that number 1 overall pick for Calgary because I think it fits a need. Now, the devil's advocate argument would be that there's also a need for this team potentially at receiver, and there may not be a ton of elite level receivers available in this draft either. So maybe you go with a guy like Keelan White at that spot. I know that's something that you batted back and forth, but to me right now, you are locked in with Fraser Sopik as your starter at weak side linebacker at this moment. Micah Tights in behind him is potentially a little bit past it at this stage of his career, still a functional player, but maybe not somebody who you're betting on in the long term. I think Connor Shea comes in and maybe he isn't a day 1 starter, but he's somebody who can grow in that role behind Sopik and potentially give you meaningful minutes on defense this upcoming season. When you look at what else they have on the roster, I think that is the key need because you can start Philpott and Barnes as 2 Canadian receivers with the veteran American rule. You can rotate one of those guys out to make sure you get somebody like Tevin Jones on the field, and you can compensate for that Canadian receiver spot a little bit more than you can compensate for the linebacker spot, in my opinion.
I also just realized with the mock draft open that I got Alex Singleton's draft year incorrect. It was 2016, not 2017. So I'll be correcting that right now.
How dare you, Hodge?
I know. You know why I think it was? It's because, I'm going to botch his name. Alex Singleton's younger brother. Was it Matt? Matt Singleton?
Matt Singleton, yeah.
Was at the Combine in 2017. So I met Alex Singleton at the Combine in 2017, but it was not his Combine. He got drafted the year before. He was at the 2017 Combine in Regina as a brother, not as a prospect. But my
Shout
bad.
out Matt Singleton.
Shout out Matt Singleton. But I should have had that correct in my article. So it's fixed now. But I think that Keelan White is a guy, receiver, out of Montana, who could be the first overall pick. I originally sketched out Connor Shea as the number 1. For a long time, I operated with Keelan White in the number 1 pick. By the way, I've got Keelan White going to the Montreal Alouettes at 5 right now. Could he still be the first overall pick? Yes. the Calgary Stampeders need a receiver. Keelan White started as a walk-on at Montana, eventually got a scholarship. For the record, Dave Dickinson is a Montana legend. His number is retired at Montana. He is arguably the greatest player ever to come out of that football program. So he's clearly got strong ties there. The Stampeders need a receiver, right? Cole Tucker retired. Ryzen John did not pan out. Clark Barnes is going into a contract year. Jalen Philpott has struggled with injuries at times. So I think Keelan White could be a good addition. And that team, I only have them projected to start one Canadian receiver this year, but they could easily start two, right? So I think he could be the guy. I also think if you're the Stampeders, you could look to reinforce the lines, right? I think there are some very good offensive linemen available in this draft. The deepest position, I think, and arguably is D-line. Everybody you talk to talks about the D-line. Does Calgary need D-line help? Absolutely. And there's actually a really good defensive lineman from Montana in this draft. But I think if you're the Stampeders, you're going, okay, we got to pick at 8. We know there's going to be a great defensive lineman there. Mm-hmm. Let's wait till 8 for our defensive lineman. It doesn't make sense to take one at 1. So for that reason, I've got Connor Shea as the pick. I still think it could be Keelan White. I still think if they absolutely fall in love with an O-lineman, it could be an O-lineman. But I think right now, if you were to place a bet on the first overall pick in the CFL draft, I think Connor Shea would have the shortest odds. And I think that's for a reason. I think he'd be a great pick there. Let's talk about number 2. I've got Darian Newell out of Queens to the Hamilton Tiger Cats. JC, I know you saw Darian Newell up close at the College Gridiron Showcase in Texas. What did you see from him there?
To me, this is a slam dunk selection, and this is absolutely where the Hamilton Tiger Cats should go with their pick. If they get Darian Newell, I think he's a guy who starts for them this season as a rookie and makes an impact as a rookie starter. He has tremendous twitch for a guy who's over 290 pounds, just raw, unadulterated power, beautiful dancing bare feet. He is everything that you want in a defensive tackle in the Canadian Football League. I think he might even be underrated at this point because, frankly, if I was an NFL team, I would be giving him a long, hard look as a potential UDFA. Potentially, that interest might come if he shows out at the University at Buffalo Pro Day, which is also happening today, and he gets that attention. Maybe that changes things at the top of the draft. But for right now, this would be an absolute marvelous first draft pick for general manager Ted Gavaya.
Yeah, Newell is going to perform at the University at Buffalo Pro Day on March 13th, and he is also attending the CFL Combine. So if you're an NFL team who's interested in potentially bringing him in, and yes, he, by the way, played for the Gales. At least he was listed in the 270s the last couple seasons. He is now up to 295 pounds. So I don't know if he's gained that weight potentially to try to make the NFL. Obviously, if you're going to play along the interior of a defensive line in the NFL, you've got to be heavier than 270. But he is a sensational player, right? 2-time first-team All-Canadian, 1-time second-team All-Canadian, 18 sacks the last 3 years from a generally interior spot with the Gales. Unbelievable player. Super impactful. I agree, JC, that he would be in the mix to start for the Tiger Cats this year. I also think the Tiger Cats, given how much help they need along the D-line, I don't have this in the mock, but they could be a team to double up on D-line and go D-line at 2 and D-line at 10. Because I know I just said with the Stampeders, well, they can wait till 8 for their D-linemen. Well, the Tiger Cats, I think, could actually, depending on who's available, double dip and go D-line at both positions to take advantage of this great draft class. Number 3, I have Eric Anderson, offensive lineman to the Ottawa Redblacks. My logic with this is the 2 consensus top O-linemen are Eric Anderson out of Western and Christopher Fortin out of Connecticut. Eric Anderson, I think, has the potential to play tackle in the CFL. He is lean, he is long, he is athletic, he moves really well in space. I do think he could be converted to guard, absolutely. But the Ottawa Redblacks are one of few teams who play a Canadian offensive tackle. And if you are drafting an offensive lineman for the future, they don't need a starter right now. I think it makes sense to take a guy who has the potential to play tackle. I certainly think Christopher Fortin could be the pick here. I also do like what the Red Blacks have along the offensive line. I don't think you have to take an offensive lineman, but I think it would be a shrewd move here. Dante Bull, the team's first overall pick in 2023, hasn't panned out. Keep in mind he broke his leg in his final collegiate season. I think he's still working back from that a little bit. Hasn't been quite the same. But if you look at whether it's Jacob Ruby, who's a little bit older, Peter Godber, who's a little bit older, Darius Bladdock, who's a little bit older. Speaking of guys who are at the 2017 Combine, Darius Bladdock was there out of Bethune-Cookman. Right, this is a unit that could stand to get a little younger, could stand to get a little cheaper. And if the Red Blacks feel as though Eric Anderson or Christopher Fortin is, let's say, only a year away from being a starter, whether it's at guard, whether it's at tackle, I think that either of these guys would be a good add. I think Keelan White could be the pick. I think the Red Blacks need a receiver. I think there are other guys who could be in the mix, but that is why I mocked it the way that I did.
Yeah, this is where I start to have questions or debates with this mock is with this pick at third overall. Personally, I have Christopher Fortin above Eric Anderson in my offensive line rankings right now. I just think he's really, really clean as a prospect at this stage, more of a high floor guy. Eric Anderson might have a higher ceiling. I think Anderson makes more sense for Ottawa because of that ability to play tackle, but you look across their roster, could they go with a guy like Ali Saad from Bowling Green along the defensive line? To me, he feels a little bit like a Cleon Lang in a lot of ways as potentially a replacement for him down the line. I know they just took Daniel Okpoko last year, but they could add more along that defensive line or receiver, as you mentioned. Right now, behind Nick Mardner, the only guy you have is Jeremy Murphy, who was a decently high draft pick out of Concordia a few years ago for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, but hasn't done a ton yet in the CFL. I don't think you're necessarily set on him as a contributor for your roster. White would make a lot of sense, or even a guy I am far less high on in Damian Alford, who actually fits the mold of Nick Mardner a little bit more in the fact that they are both 6'6" outside deep threat receivers. I think there's a little bit of a parallel there that they might match up nicely schematic-wise. I'm not sure I see Alford that highly, but I think there's an argument to be made that maybe he fits what the Red Blacks want to be doing at that position.
At 4, I've got the Riders taking defensive lineman Paris Shand. I think the D-line is a spot where the Riders can use some more Canadian talent. This is an interesting one, though, however, because Paris Shand at LSU played his first 3 seasons at the University of Arizona before transferring to the Tigers. Like, when you play in the SEC and you're not a pushover, there's a good chance you're going to get an NFL look. I don't think Paris Shand is going to get drafted in the NFL, but I certainly think he can be an undrafted free agent. Though, the Riders showed last year, they're happy to take UDFAs in the first round of the CFL draft. They did that with Kyle Hergel. Hasn't paid off so far. He played 8 games for the New Orleans Saints last year as a UDFA out of Boston College. But Paris Shand, if he ever were to come up to the CFL, would be potentially the best Canadian defensive lineman in the league. And that, I think, is why the Riders were willing to roll the dice on Kyle Hergel. And with no obvious immediate needs, I think the Riders could roll the dice again. They might opt for a safer pick. I think that Christopher Fortin could be in the mix here as a high floor offensive lineman. I think that Keelan White could be an option. The Riders could start as many as 3 Canadians, right, in the receiving corps. I think that Ali Saad could be an option here for the reasons you laid out, JC. But if you look at what the Riders did last year, rolling the dice on a likely NFL UDFA, I think Shand could be the guy here. He started 9 games over the last 2 seasons for the Tigers at the highest level of collegiate football in the SEC. He recorded 27 total tackles, 9 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, but 19 QB pressures. That is a lot. He is somebody who's probably going to be in the NFL for a year or 2, but if he ever were to come to Riderville, what a coup that would be for that team.
The next couple picks you have listed here, I love for both of those teams. At number 5, you have the Montreal Alouettes going with receiver Keelan White from Montana, who we've talked about a little bit already. I think this is as obvious a pick as you could possibly have in this draft. And I know there'll be people who say, well, Montreal likes to go with some guys that are from Quebec. They've shown that they'll go away from that if the talent is there. And I think they have a desperate need at receiver. Tyson Philpott, of course, I think is an elite talent, but it's coming off injury. Is he going to be able to stay healthy for an entire season? You've lost Keon Julian Grant. Really, all you've got is Shedler Furvius, who was a late rounder a few years ago, and Daniel Oladejo on the roster. Keelan White can come in there and be a guy who can sit behind Philpott right now, but start for you in a pinch and become a contributor, replace KJG going forward. And then at number 6, I think if Christopher Fortin, who I would argue is the best offensive lineman in this draft right now, drops to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, they will be dancing in the streets. This is a guy who didn't play a ton at UConn for most of his career, but started this past season and was absolutely exceptional. Did not allow a sack, graded out extremely highly on the analytics, is a smooth mover for his size. Maybe lacks a little bit of nasty finish to his game, but I think is a really, really high floor guy who will fit in well on that Bombers offensive line that really needs some depth right now.
I think that pick 5 to the Alouettes, if Keelan White was available, I think they take him. That is really the only weak spot on their roster right now. They don't have a lot of depth behind Tyson Philpott. But the reason I want to highlight pick 5 is I think that is when the QB market opens. I don't see a quarterback going top 4. I think that pick 5 to the Alouettes, a team that doesn't necessarily have kind of the next guy, like Davis Alexander was the next guy. Well, now he's the present, right? You've got McLeod Bethel-Thompson as the 2, but he's also in his late 30s. And then behind him, you've got Caleb Evans, who at this point is kind of a career short yardage guy. And you've got James Morgan, former NFLer who hasn't really done anything up here and is also not a spring chicken. So I think that is the team. When you look at a team with no immediate needs, a team that could easily carry a Canadian quarterback as their third option, I think that is where the window opens for Curtis Rourke, even though he's likely to be an NFL draft pick, and for Taylor Elgersma out of Wilfrid Laurier. I think that is the starting point of the Canadian market. I also think Winnipeg, a team that doesn't seem to have that next guy either. They've got Zach Collaros, who's still playing at a high level, dipped in 2024, but still playing at a high level. You've got Chris Streveler, kind of again, career gadget, short yardage guy. Terry Wilson, who hasn't really played, right? They brought in Shea Patterson. They've got Jake Dolegala. But again, I don't think anybody's looking at those guys as the next guy. I think Winnipeg, it's not impossible that they take Taylor Elgersma. I did not mock Taylor Elgersma to the Toronto Argonauts at 7. I put Ali Saad, who we've talked about out of Bowling Green. I think Taylor Elgersma could absolutely be a Toronto Argonaut in 2025. I opted away from it because they brought back their 3 quarterbacks, right? Chad Kelly's not going anywhere anytime soon. They've got Nick Arbuckle. They've got Cameron Dukes. But I think Taylor Elgersma could be the pick at 7. We'll have to wait and see.
Yes, I completely agree. To me, that pick by the Argonauts at 7 is where I sort of have Elgersma penciled in personally. I think it would be a marvelous fit for them at the moment in terms of they have the flexibility to wait on a quarterback because they have guys in place. And I think you are going to have to wait at least a couple of seasons for Taylor Elgersma because he's going to get that NFL late round UDFA opportunity. But I think frame-wise, he's another big body guy like Chad Kelly. I think he fits an immediate short yardage need where they weren't exactly satisfied with their backup options there. I think Taylor Elgersma can take some of that pounding away from Kelly if he was to become available. And then the thing that nobody, I think, has really brought up in regards to Elgersma is he was part of the U Sports QB internship with a number of CFL teams. He told me that the one that had perhaps the biggest impact on him was the time he spent with the Toronto Argonauts and QB coach Mike Miller, who was a massive fan of El Guerisma and actually tried to pull some strings to get him potentially opportunities in the NCAA. If he was that high in El Guerisma when he was in training camp with them, he might be a guy who says, come draft time, hey, this is a future starter. We can't afford to let him slip past us.
Rounding out the first round, I've got Hayden Harris out of Montana going to the Stampeders. We already talked about Dave Dickinson's ties to Montana. Hayden Harris, 6'5", 255. He's also a quote-unquote fake Canadian, right? Born in Washington, qualified for Canadian citizenship through his mother, who was born in Vancouver, raised in Regina, still has family in Saskatchewan, by the way. He's somebody who didn't play very much over 4 seasons at UCLA, but transferred to Montana and has been sensational the last 2 years. Was a second-team All-Big Sky selection in 2024. He's somebody who I think, regardless of passport, could just help Calgary's pass rush. And if he happens to become a starter at some point, great news for them. I don't think we have to go through every pick in the second round, JC, but some highlights. Jackson Finley out of Western to BC. The Lions don't need a starter in the secondary, but with Christoph Boscheman as the likely starter at safety, I think they need to up their...
Christian Beaulieu. Or
What did I
Christophe
say?
Beaulieu. Christian Boscheman.
Oh, well, my bad. Christophe Beaulieu, pardon me. Laval draft pick in the third round last year. Christophe Boscheman, why is it in my head?
Because
Nate Boscheman is in this year's draft. My apologies.
Safety
My brain has stopped working, evidently. My apologies. Christophe Beaulieu as the likely starter at safety. I think they need some depth there. I think they need some special teams youth. Jackson Finley, 6'3", 205 pounds, freak athlete. He's going to be one of the top testers at the combine. I've got Taylor Elgersma to the Ticats at 10. Is he going to slide to 10? Not sure, but if he does, I think Hamilton's a great spot for him as a potential heir apparent to Bo Levi Mitchell. Isaiah Bagna, defensive lineman out of BYU. I've got to Edmonton. I think it's almost a foregone conclusion that general manager Ed Hervey will take a offensive or defensive lineman. It's kind of what he does. Bagna, in my opinion, best one on the board. BC needs to add O-line. I've got them taking Sam Carson out of Louisiana Monroe, former University of Calgary Dino. And then onward, some notable picks. I've got Damien Alford, top-ranked receiver to Toronto at 17. He's a guy who, as you mentioned, JC, 6'6", 210 pounds, has very legit production from his 4-year stint at Syracuse. But I also think the way that he left the draft, came back into the draft, the way that he said he was coming to the combine, then reneged on that, I think has turned some teams off. So I think he could fall relative to his size and his production. And then I've got Curtis Rourke to Winnipeg at 18. And my reason for that is this is a free pick, right? The Bombers were given this as a bonus. Even if Curtis Rourke never comes to the CFL, I think giving up a pick you got for nothing is a relatively low price to pay for the possibility of getting Curtis Rourke at some point in the future. He's 24. He's coming off a torn ACL. I think Curtis Rourke is probably a late round pick in this year's NFL draft. I think he's down there minimum 2 seasons. But I have spoken to people in the CFL who think that Curtis Rourke will be a CFL player by 2027. And if you're the Bombers and it costs you a free second round pick and 2 years of waiting, I think you do that in a heartbeat. Curtis Rourke, like generally NFL draft picks, if they're picked at all in the CFL draft, we're talking around 7-8. I think Curtis Rourke will still go at the latest, like round 3-4 in the CFL draft, even if he's picked in the NFL draft, just because of the upside that he would bring should he ever sign a CFL contract.
Yeah, I don't want to pat you too hard on the back here, Hodge, but I think you really nailed it with a lot of these second round selections. I love where you placed a number of these players. For the BC Lions, I think if you don't pick in the first round and with your top 2 selections, you end up with Jackson Finley and Sam Carson, the offensive lineman out of Louisiana Monroe, you are singing in the streets. Jackson Finley, a local guy, went to Vancouver College, a legacy player. His grandfather was a 2-time All-Star for the BC Lions and is going to be, I think, somebody who's far better in the community than he's going to be on the field. And I think he is a potential all-star at safety on the field. He is that type of person, future pediatric oncologist, wants to go to med school, but has a volunteer calendar that is absolutely unbelievable, potentially a future Tom Pate or Jake Gadar award winner in my mind. He is that character of person. And then Sam Carson, really, really solid offensive lineman, has played a lot of tackle despite lack of size, but will kick inside to guard at the CFL level. Maybe not flashy in a lot of what he does, but really solid across the board. That would be valuable depth there. I love Isaiah Bagna to the Edmonton Elks. I think he's a perfect backup to Robbie Smith. Jeremiah Ojo, I think, is a great pick to the Montreal Alouettes because they just brought in Josh Archibald. I just saw Ojo at the College Gridiron Showcase, like I saw Archibald a few years ago at that very same event. And I will tell you what, the thought I had while watching Ojo was, hey, he's reminding me a lot of what Archibald did down here a few years ago. So I think that's a beautiful marriage there as well. And then the last pick you have for the Lions at 19, Jalen Smith, the linebacker from North Texas. I know the Lions added a couple of linebackers in free agency, veteran Canadians in Adam Auclair and Adam Konar, so people might not think this is a need. But Jalen Smith, for all the production he had this last year, over 100 tackles with the Mean Green, before that, he was an elite special teams player, one of the best in the country in the NCAA at running down on kickoff. That's something that the Lions have to improve, that they are desperate to find. I think they would take this guy in a heartbeat if he was available at 19.
He'll be an interesting one, right? Malik Straker is kind of the rough comp. Like last year, Malik Straker, like insane production at Arkansas State, but only measured in, I think it was 5'10" and 200 pounds, and then didn't run great at that size. So he was somebody who was in the Scouting Bureau rankings, right? Top 20, ends up going 4th round of Saskatchewan, but then had a good rookie season, right? 9 special teams tackles in 10 games. Obviously, Jalen Smith's a little thicker than that. He's listed at 230. His pro day is March 21st, so we'll know then officially how tall and how heavy he is. Some of these collegiate rankings are very accurate. Some are dubious at best, as is shown repeatedly every year. Some guys are listed at 6'3" and they measure in at 6'3". Some guys are listed at 6'3" and they measure in at...
his exact height and weight in 2 seconds. What do I have him at? Because we get it at CGS. He is 5'11", 222 pounds.
Okay, so that, I mean, teams will want more height than that for a will, but like that's, there are lots of guys who play will at that size and are good. Adam Bighill is like 5'9", and he's going to the Hall of Fame. So I don't understand why people care about the height of linebackers, but whatever, they tend to. There are also lots of linebackers who are 6'3" and are terrible, but whatever. Regardless, he's an interesting one for me, Jalen Smith. Devin Verasuk out of Windsor, I've also got going in the second round. I think he's probably the consensus linebacker too. Not sure he's ever a starter, but he's somebody who could be like a CFL league leader in special teams tackles down the line. So he'll be a good pick, I think, for whoever gets up. It's now time for Hodge's Heritage Moment. On this day in 2019, 5 NFL teams visited Concordia University for the pro day for Canadian offensive lineman Maurice Simba. The 6'7", 343-pound blocker posted 25 reps of 225 pounds on the bench press, but not all of his testing numbers were great, as he ran a 5.99 second 40-yard dash and leapt only 19 inches in the vertical jump. The native of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who played football for only 6 years before his pro day, attended rookie minicamp with the Kansas City Chiefs, but didn't sign with the team, instead joining the Toronto Argonauts after being a 4th-round pick in the 2019 CFL Draft. He played 1 game with the Boltmen, but was cut loose before the start of the 2021 season. Simba attended training camp with the Saskatchewan Roughriders in 2022, but didn't make their final roster and has been a free agent ever since. JC, how do you remember Simba?
Well, I'll remember the height, and or the hype, I should say, and I'll remember not quite understanding it. And I think this happens almost every year when we go through the draft process, is there's one thing that you really can't teach, and that is size, right? If a guy is big, he's big. You can't make guys be 6'7", 343 pounds. And that will sometimes attract a lot of attention that exceeds maybe what that player is capable of on the field, and will get them drafted higher than perhaps they should be. very few of those guys, particularly the ones who don't move very well at that size, pan out. Maurice Simba was just yet another example of somebody who was just a little bit too big to succeed at the CFL game. But there's a laundry list of guys who have been before him and since him in that same category.
I agree, JC. And the other thing is, I think that he almost became a bit of a cautionary. First of all, we have to, I think, just appreciate it is wild that there were 5 NFL teams at Concordia. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean to disrespect the Stingers program. They are generally the number 3 team in the RSCQ. And they have churned out some very good CFL players, right? Very good. Like Rene Paredes, former Stinger. Corey Greenwood, who played in the NFL for a long time, former Stinger, right? Like there are very good players who played for the Stingers. But the thought that they're going to host a pro day and have 5 NFL teams show up, that's wild. I also think that this illustrates how the memory of the draft can kind of play forward. And what I mean by that is Maurice Simba was taken top of 4 in 2018. Well, 2 years later, a player pretty similar, at least like 6'7", 330-ish, maybe not the best athlete, but, had all of the RSEQ and U Sports, recognition, Kitala say, out of Laval. Well, he falls to the 8th round, right? I think there were a lot of people who looked at Maurice Simba and went, oh, that was a landmine that we shouldn't have stepped on. Let's not do that again. And that's why Kitala say fell to the 8th round. And actually, I think started a few games for the Ottawa Red Blacks, but no, didn't have an amazing CFL career. Regardless, wherever you are, Maurice Simba, we hope you're doing well. It's now time for the 3-minute drill. At least 7 Canadian players will participate in the upcoming University at Buffalo Pro Day. Other than quarterback Taylor Elgersma, which one are you most excited to watch?
Well, it would be Darian Newell. We've already talked about him. I think he is a guy who could legitimately get an NFL look after this event, depending on how he performs. I think he's going to be an elite tester for his size. He has all the twitch. He got NFL interviews at the College Gridiron Showcase. I think he could really turn some heads. Veteran defensive back Brandon Alexander posted a farewell message on social media that was misinterpreted as a retirement post. Is he still planning to play?
Yes, he is. He made that clear after his post was misinterpreted. We misinterpreted it here at 3DownNation, but we were not the only ones in the media. It was reported all over the place that he'd retired. He has not retired. We appreciate his agent for reaching out to clarify that. I'm not sure that Brandon Alexander gets signed. He is a hard-hitting safety. He's got value there, but a lot of teams don't want American safeties, and he's not the fastest guy. He was never a burner. I think he's gotten noticeably slower. That being said, I've heard nothing but amazing things about Brandon Alexander as a leader. He was one of the people who would be in at 6 a.m, grinding film and game planning and helping out with those things. So on that side of it, I think he's got a bright future as a coach. And maybe as kind of a culture character guy could help a team. The BC Lions sold out their preseason game in Langford in 12 minutes. JC, do you think you'll make the trip out there for that one?
I absolutely will. I think it's great to take this exhibition game on the road back to Vancouver Island. And I can't wait to see what the atmosphere will be with a sold-out crowd. Hodge, you reported that top prospect Damien Alford has reneged on the CFL Combine and will instead attend the Big 12 Pro Day. How'd that come about?
Well, it came out just recently. Speaking with Alford's agent, just a couple of days ago, Alford got into this event, and I think the hang-up, this is my speculation, but I think the hang-up was he'd actually transferred from Utah to Florida Atlantic University when he was planning to play collegiately in 2025. He since reneged on that, deciding to go pro, and then he had to kind of work his way back to get into the Big 12 Pro Day because Florida Atlantic's not in the Big 12, right? Utah is. So he played at Utah in 2024. He is now at that Pro Day for 2025. The Calgary Stampeders signed former UFL quarterback Josh Love. Do you think he'll make their roster in 2025?
I don't think so. I think he'll probably be out on the outside looking in, but at the same time, they signed a guy who I could see making their roster this upcoming season, and that was another quarterback, Joey Gatewood. I don't think he'll make it as a true quarterback, but he was converted to a tight end, great big-bodied physical athlete at that position. Guess who he reminds me of? Tommy Stevens, who they lost in free agency, I think he could be the short yardage guy in Calgary going forward. The New York Giants are signing Canadian DB Javon Holland to a 3-year contract worth up to $46.8 million. Is that good money for a safety?
That's really good money for a safety. And the projection, by the way, that I'd seen reported before he signed was $15.1 million a year. He essentially got exactly that. Other big deals. I mean, Josh Palmer, Canadian receiver to the Buffalo Bills, $36 million. And then Michael Hoyt, Canadian D lineman / linebacker, $24 million. Again, with the Buffalo Bills. Nice to see the Bills, by the way, signing a couple of Canadians. Josh Palmer out of Brampton, Ontario. Michael Hoyt originally from Oakville. Canadian-American linebacker Alex Singleton made a cameo on the Netflix reality show Love is Blind. What?
I'm not sure I'm the one who's qualified to talk about this because this isn't exactly a show that's my cup of tea, but it appears that they had some connection with the NFL in terms of announcing the next host city for this dating reality show. Minnesota Vikings safety Josh Metellus passed the ball off to Alex Singleton to announce that his NFL team's city of Denver will be the next place where this show takes place. What I want to know is, Hodge, am I getting hazard pay for messing up my Netflix algorithm to watch this clip? Because I'm now getting ads for all sorts of reality shows. I need to return to the peace and quiet I had before. The Blue Bombers rounded out their coaching staff with the addition of running backs coach Andre Bolduc and receivers coach Billy Jean. Are these good ads?
I can't speak to Billy Jean. I'm not familiar with him. But Andre Bolduc has been in the CFL forever, right? He was once an assistant head coach with the Montreal Alouettes. I thought he did a very nice job positionally with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I think he is a nice veteran ad to take over for Jason Hogan, who is now the offensive coordinator. JC, you attended the recent UBC Pro Day, headlined by quarterback Garrett Rooker and running back Isaiah Knight. How did they look?
I thought they looked solid. Now, Isaiah Wright ran 4.76 as a running back. I don't think that's going to turn any NFL heads legitimately, but he's a big body guy with really long arms and a chiseled physique for the position. He will be a nice CFL player. And then Garrett Rooker looked like how I expected. He threw the ball really well. I think he's a guy who is on the fringes of a potential CFL prospect. When you look at some of the other guys who got invited to a combine, like Keegan Hall, Jackson Tuchinski, I think from a pure quarterbacking perspective, Garrett Rooker is a better thrower at the position. I'm surprised that he didn't get invited to the main showcase in Regina. Shawn Bane Jr. told 980 CJME that rehab for his knee surgery is going beautifully. Do you think he'll be ready for the start of training camp?
Given the way that Bane was speaking, right, reading these quotes, I think he will be. He seems to be, these are playful in nature, so I'm speculating here, but I feel like if things were going badly, Shawn Bane Jr. would not be speaking this playfully about his future. I expect he'll be ready and have a bounce back year after suffering a season-ending injury in 2024. On that note, we thank you as always for listening to the 3DownNation podcast. For JC Velveeta Abbott, I'm John Hodge. We'll see you next week for our next episode.